The macabre history of the Becketts, a secret billionaire, took in 11 kids from nowhere. Winter of 2015 brought with it a discovery that would shake the foundations of American child welfare and expose one of the most sophisticated cases of hidden wealth and systematic child acquisition in modern history. Dr. Amanda Stevens, a forensic accountant investigating irregular financial patterns for the Treasury Department, stumbled upon a network of charitable organizations and trust funds that had been moving hundreds of millions of dollars through complex international transactions for over 2 decades, all connected to a man who, according to official records, did not exist. The investigation began when automated financial monitoring systems flagged unusual patterns in charitable tax deductions reported by a series of seemingly unrelated nonprofit organizations operating across 15 states. These organizations claim to operate residential facilities for orphaned and at-risk children, but Treasury Department audits could find no evidence of the facilities, staff, or children that the tax documents described. Dr. Stevens' analysis revealed that the organizations were part of an elaborate financial structure designed to channel money toward a single destination, a 2,000-acre estate in the mountains of western Montana that had been purchased in 1995 by entities controlled by someone using the name Nathaniel Beckett. But when Stevens attempted to verify Beckett's identity, she discovered that no person by that name appeared in any government database, credit system, or public record. Nathaniel Beckett was a financial ghost who had somehow acquired enormous wealth and used it to create one of the most sophisticated money laundering operations in American history. But unlike typical financial crimes that moved money for profit or to hide illegal activities, Beckett's network seemed designed to fund legitimate, charitable work while maintaining complete anonymity for both the donor and the recipients. Montana Estate, which Stevens identified through property tax records and satellite imagery, appeared to be a fully operational residential facility housing a substantial number of children and staff. The complex included multiple residential buildings, educational facilities, recreational areas, and infrastructure that suggested a level of investment exceeding $100 million over 20 years. But when Stevens contacted local authorities to investigate the facility, she encountered a level of legal protection that was unprecedented in her experience. The estate was surrounded by multiple layers of private security, legal barriers, and jurisdictional complications that made official investigation extremely difficult. Local sheriffs, federal agents, and child welfare officials found themselves blocked by court orders, privacy laws, and procedural obstacles that had been carefully constructed to prevent outside scrutiny. Stevens' breakthrough came when she discovered financial records showing that Beckett had been acquiring children through a network of private adoption agencies, foster care organizations, and international humanitarian groups that specialized in placing orphaned and displaced children with wealthy families willing to provide intensive care and education. The financial arrangements were extraordinary. Beckett had been paying between $250,000 and $500,000 per child to organizations that could provide children with specific characteristics and backgrounds. He had acquired 11 children over a 15-year period from sources including war-torn regions, natural disaster areas, and failed states where documentation was incomplete and oversight was minimal. But perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that Beckett had been acquiring children who possessed no verifiable identity or family connections. These were children who had been orphaned in circumstances that left no paper trail, no living relatives, and no governmental or institutional oversight. They existed in legal and social limbo, making them perfect subjects for someone who wanted to avoid questions about their welfare or whereabouts. Dr. Stevens' investigation revealed that Beckett's operation had been designed from the beginning to acquire children who could be raised in complete isolation without triggering missing person investigations, family searches, or governmental oversight. He had essentially created a shadow adoption system that operated outside all conventional legal and social frameworks. The children, according to financial records and supply chain analysis, were receiving education, healthcare, and living standards that exceeded what most American children experienced. Beckett had invested millions in creating a completely self-sufficient facility that provided everything necessary for raising children in luxury and isolation. But the purpose of this massive investment remained mysteriously unclear. Beckett was not operating a conventional residential facility, orphanage, or educational institution. He had no apparent connection to child welfare organizations, religious groups, or philanthropic causes that might explain his interest in acquiring and raising orphan children. Federal authorities finally obtained search warrants for the Montana estate in March 2016, based on Stevens's financial evidence and concerns about potential child welfare violations. What they discovered there would challenge every assumption about wealth, privacy, and the relationship between money and power in modern America. The estate was revealed to be a completely self-contained world where 11 children, now ranging in age from 8 to 23, had been living their entire conscious lives under the care of a man who had systematically erased his own identity, while creating new identities for children who had never officially existed. Nathaniel Beckett appeared to be in his 60s, with the bearing and education of someone from an elite background, but his true identity remained stubbornly hidden behind layers of false documentation and financial arrangements that had been constructed over decades. He possessed multiple passports, had maintained residences in various countries, and had been involved in business activities that spanned continents, while leaving no traceable connections to his personal history. The children themselves presented a puzzle that immediately confused federal investigators and child welfare specialists. They appeared physically and emotionally healthy, were remarkably well educated, and possessed capabilities that exceeded most conventionally raised children their age. They spoke multiple languages, demonstrated advanced knowledge in science and mathematics, and displayed cultural sophistication that suggested extensive travel and exposure to diverse educational experiences. But they also exhibited psychological characteristics that alarmed the professionals who interviewed them. They showed complete loyalty to Beckett, whom they referred to as father, and expressed no desire to leave the estate or experience life outside their isolated community. They had been taught that the outside world was dangerous and corrupt, and that their isolation was protection rather than deprivation. Most troubling was their apparent lack of individual identity beyond their role in Beckett's household. They had been given names and birth dates by Beckett, but possessed no memories or knowledge of their lives before arriving at the estate. They seemed to view themselves not as individuals with personal histories, but as components in a family structure that Beckett had created for purposes that remained deliberately unclear. The investigation revealed that Beckett had been conducting what amounted to a decades-long experiment in alternative child development, using his wealth to create a controlled environment where children could be raised according to his specifications without interference from conventional social institutions. The children had been systematically educated and conditioned to serve roles in some larger project that Beckett had been planning for years. Financial analysis showed that Beckett had been preparing for external investigation throughout his operation, maintaining legal protections and escape plans that would allow him to disappear with the children if authorities discovered his location. His estate included sophisticated communication equipment, transportation resources, and financial arrangements that could facilitate rapid evacuation to countries without extradition treaties with the United States. But perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that Beckett's operation was part of a larger network of similar facilities operating in multiple countries. Financial records revealed connections to other wealthy individuals who had been funding comparable projects involving the acquisition and conditioning of children for undefined purposes. The children themselves provided Few clues about Beckett's ultimate intentions or their role in his plans. They had been taught to view questions about their purpose as premature, understanding that their preparation was ongoing and that their eventual responsibilities would be revealed when they reached appropriate maturity. As federal authorities attempted to understand the scope and purpose of Beckett's operation, they realized they were confronting something unprecedented in American law enforcement, a systematic program that had used enormous wealth to acquire children and subject them to intensive conditioning while maintaining complete legal protection and social invisibility. The investigation would ultimately reveal that Nathaniel Beckett was not simply a wealthy eccentric who had chosen to raise orphan children in isolation, but the architect of a sophisticated plan that connected contemporary child acquisition to historical patterns of wealth, power, and social control that stretched back through generations of American elite families. The 11 children who had grown up believing they were members of the Beckett family were about to discover that their entire existence had been carefully constructed to serve purposes that were far more complex and disturbing than they had ever imagined. The federal investigation that followed the discovery of Nathaniel Beckett's operation would ultimately expose one of the most chilling examples of generational planning and systematic child exploitation in American history, revealing that the mysterious billionaire was not acting alone, but as part of a centuries-old conspiracy involving some of America's most powerful families. FBI Special Agent Sarah Martinez, who took control of the investigation in April 2016, discovered that Nathaniel Beckett was actually Thomas Ashford Rothschild III, heir to one of the oldest and most secretive American fortunes, dating back to the colonial period. His family had been involved in banking, shipping, and industrial development for over 2 centuries, accumulating wealth and influence while maintaining deliberate anonymity that kept them absent from public records and social registers. Rothschild family papers, discovered in hidden archives throughout the Montana estate, revealed a multi-generational project that had been operating since the 1800s under the code name the Bloodline Protocol. This project involved the systematic acquisition and conditioning of children who possessed specific genetic, intellectual, and psychological characteristics that the family believed were necessary for preserving and advancing human civilization. Dr. Elizabeth Chun, a federal psychologist brought in to analyze the extensive documentation, found evidence of a belief system that viewed most of humanity as genetically and intellectually inferior, destined for extinction through war, environmental collapse, or social decay. The Rothschild family had convinced themselves that they were conducting a humanitarian project by preserving superior genetic material and raising enhanced humans who could provide leadership during future crises. The historical records revealed that each generation of Rothschilds had contributed to this project, using their wealth and influence to acquire children from various sources while developing increasingly sophisticated methods for conditioning them to serve the family's long-term goals. The children were not being raised as adoptees or heirs, but as a preserved genetic and intellectual resource that would be activated when global circumstances required their intervention. Thomas Rothschild's 11 children represented the culmination of over 150 years of selective breeding and psychological conditioning, designed to create what the family called the new aristocracy, a class of enhanced humans who would assume leadership of human civilization when democratic institutions and conventional social structures collapsed. The children had been specifically selected based on genetic analysis, psychological testing, and intellectual assessment that identified them as possessing the characteristics necessary for the family's breeding program. They were being raised not just in isolation, but as breeding stock for future generations of enhanced humans who would carry forward the Rothschild genetic legacy. Agent Martinez's investigation revealed that the Montana facility was one of 7 similar installations that the Rothschild family had established worldwide, each housing between 8 and 15 children who were being prepared for their role in the family's multi-generational project. The facilities operated as completely self-sufficient communities where children could be raised according to the family specifications without external interference. The children themselves had been systematically conditioned to accept their role as progenitors of a superior human subspecies. They had been taught that they possessed genetic gifts that made them responsible for preserving and advancing human civilization, and that their personal desires and individual autonomy were less important than their obligation to serve this larger purpose. Financial analysis revealed that the Rothschild family had invested over $2 billion in their breeding program over the past century, funding research into genetics, psychology, and human development that was decades ahead of publicly available knowledge. They had established partnerships with researchers and institutions worldwide, funding studies that provided them with scientific justification for their beliefs about genetic superiority and selective breeding. But perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that the Rothschild breeding program had been partially successful. Genetic and psychological analysis of the children revealed that they possessed intelligence, physical capabilities, and psychological characteristics that exceeded normal human ranges. They were living proof that systematic selective breeding and environmental control could create enhanced humans, but at enormous cost to their individual humanity and autonomous development. Dr. Chun's psychological evaluations revealed that the children had been systematically conditioned to suppress individual desire, emotional attachment, and personal ambition in favor of collective responsibility and genetic obligation. They viewed themselves not as individuals deserving happiness and fulfillment, but as vessels for genetic material that belonged to the Rothschild family and its historical mission. Investigation also uncovered evidence that the Rothschild family had been coordinating with other wealthy families and organizations worldwide who shared their beliefs about genetic superiority and the necessity of preserving elite bloodlines through controlled breeding. The project was part of an international network of similar operations that had been operating for generations, funded by families who viewed themselves as guardians of human genetic heritage. Thomas Rothschild, when finally interviewed by federal authorities, showed no remorse for his treatment of the children and continued to defend his family's project as necessary for the survival of human civilization. He argued that democratic societies were incapable of making the long-term decisions necessary to address global challenges, and that enhanced humans created through selective breeding would eventually be needed to provide rational leadership. The legal challenges were unprecedented. The children had been acquired through methods that violated numerous laws regarding human trafficking and child welfare, but they had also been subjected to genetic and psychological enhancement that had given them capabilities far beyond normal human ranges. They were simultaneously victims of systematic exploitation and products of successful human enhancement. The children themselves were deeply conflicted about their situation. They had been raised to believe that their genetic heritage and enhanced capabilities gave them responsibilities that transcended individual desires, but they had also been denied the opportunity to make autonomous choices about their lives and relationships. Federal authorities faced the complex task of providing care for individuals who had been systematically conditioned to reject normal human relationships and social development while possessing genetic and intellectual characteristics that made integration into mainstream society extremely challenging. The children were ultimately placed in specialized facilities designed to provide intensive therapy while protecting them from exploitation by researchers or organizations that might want to study their enhanced capabilities. Some showed progress in developing individual identity and emotional expression, while others remained psychologically committed to their role in the Rothschild breeding program. Thomas Rothschild was arrested and charged with multiple federal crimes including human trafficking, child abuse, and conspiracy to commit crimes against children. But his arrest triggered the activation of legal and financial protections that had been established over generations, making prosecution extremely difficult and ensuring that most of the Rothschild family's assets remained beyond government reach. The case led to international cooperation in investigating and dismantling networks involved in genetic experimentation and systematic child exploitation. Several other facilities similar to the Montana estate were discovered and closed, but many of the individuals involved successfully fled to countries that would not cooperate with American law enforcement. The 11 children who had been intended as the next generation of the Rothschild bloodline remain living evidence that genetic enhancement through selective breeding is technically possible, but ethically indefensible. Their superior capabilities are accompanied by profound psychological damage that may never be fully addressed through therapeutic intervention. The macabre history of the Becketts revealed that the greatest threats to children might not come from individual predators or criminals, but from systematic ideologies that view childhood as raw material for projects aimed at preserving or advancing particular genetic or social characteristics without regard for individual welfare or autonomous development. The case demonstrated that enormous wealth combined with generational planning could create conditions for systematic child exploitation that operated beyond the reach of conventional legal and social protections. The Rothschild family had used their resources to acquire children and subject them to genetic and psychological manipulation that achieved their goals while devastating the individuals involved. Their story serves as a warning that the protection of children requires vigilance not only against obvious forms of abuse, but against systematic programs that treat children as means rather than ends, and that sacrifice individual humanity for abstract theories about genetic superiority or social improvement. The children who survived the Rothschild breeding program continue to struggle with the legacy of their enhancement, serving as living reminders that some forms of genetic and psychological manipulation can create capabilities that come at costs that make the achievements meaningless. Their ongoing recovery influences research into genetic engineering, selective breeding, and other technologies that might be used to enhance human capabilities at the expense of individual dignity and autonomous development. Thank you for watching another tale unfold here on NW Storytime. Every story hides a secret, and tonight you uncovered another one. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us keep the secrets alive. Until next time, stay curious,